Well, hey, everybody, welcome to the White Knuckle Podcast powered by Ozonics. Well, hey, everybody, welcome back to the White Knuckle Podcast powered by Ozonics. Yes, that's correct. Powered by Ozonics. Today, officially, we are announcing that Ozonics is the title sponsor for the White Knuckle Podcast. We couldn't be more excited that Ozonics has chosen to partner with us on the White Knuckle Podcast. So, what does that mean to you? What it means is we are going to, once a month, between here and the end of the year, Ozonics is going to be giving away a significant prize package once a month to one of the White Knuckle Podcast loyal listeners. What do you have to do? Just show up. Show up and listen every week, and during the week that we are giving it away, we'll obviously make an announcement of how to enter into that contest, and at the end of the following week, we will announce the winner of that contest. Now, these aren't just little prizes like an extendable tree arm or an extra battery or anything like that. We're talking big-time prizes. We're talking an HR 300 and a kinetic pack, or an HR 200 in a kinetic pack, or an HR 300 in a dry wash bag. Whatever the case, we all know that these things cost a significant amount of money, and it's well worth your while. Tune into the podcast every week so you can get your chance to win one of the Ozonics prize packages. With that, let's get into our public land series. This is episode number 1 of 4. Before we get a whole lot farther into the podcast, I should tell you to go to our Facebook page and check out the pictures I have that are downloadable on our Facebook page that will give you a reference in terms of the maps that the folks that are going to be on these next 4 podcasts are going to be talking about. We've looked at the Apple River public hunting area in Joe Daviess County in northwestern Illinois. So if that's a good point of reference for you, go ahead and Google that and search that out and look at that map, or you can check out the maps that I've got on Facebook. Whatever the case, here is my conversation with none other than Mr. Todd Pringnitz. Before we get Todd too carried away on talking like he loves to do, kidding Todd, this is kind of the way this whole process is going to work. What I've done is I've picked a piece of property, and I've had the guys that I've picked go ahead and look at these properties beforehand. They've all been given the maps. You'll be given the map via Facebook. We'll have it posted there, and the guys have gotten to look at those maps, and we'll get a chance to dissect those and tell us what they like, what they dislike, a chance to pick their brain on what processes they go through in deciding whether or not a place is, from a 50,000 foot view is, number one, worth their time. And then once they decide it's worth their time, how it is that they go about, prioritizing all the different places that are available to hunt. Because if you're in Wisconsin or Illinois or Iowa or Michigan or any of those places, there's a plethora of places to go. So with that, I'll get going here with the show, and my first guest, who is none other than Mr. Todd Pringnitz. Now, most of you will say, why Todd? Well, because it's his show and he gets to set some of the rules. I only get to set most of them. Kidding. Todd spent a considerable amount of time prior to moving to Iowa, and then after moving to Iowa, hunting a lot of different public ground in Illinois. So Todd's got a significant amount of experience, not only hunting in Illinois, but also in Michigan, where he grew up, hunting public ground. So Todd's got a ton of information to offer, as he always does. So let's sit back, relax, and listen to what Todd has to say. Todd, buddy, how's everything going today?
I'm doing fantastic, man. I was already on the piece of property. I've got 14 tree stands trimmed, 27 trail cameras hung, and I've already got 3 Boone and Crockett's located. So I'm pretty excited about this piece.
Have another cup of coffee.
I'm totally full of it, by the way. No, I'm doing good, man. Getting into this public land hunting thing, it brings me back to, some of my earlier days. And I know not a lot of you from the White Knuckle podcast history, or even our web shows or DVDs, we didn't show too much public land hunting in our early days or since. But boy, when I grew up and got into the hunting mature whitetails and traveling out of the state of Michigan, we hunted a ton of public land, and I grew up hunting public land in Michigan for 16 years, and then we hunted in Illinois and a bunch of different public land for many years, myself and Walter Easling as well. And so this brings me back the old parking areas and the units and trying to figure out, how to kill a big deer on public land. So this kind of strikes home for me, and I'm excited to talk about some of my strategies I would go into with this particular piece.
Well, let's do that. Let's jump right into it. But prior to doing that, what I'm going to ask all of you is just give me your 50,000-foot view, if you will, of the property as a whole. What do you like? What do you not like? What is it that catches your attention immediately, so that if someone like myself were to look at this on Google Earth and say, is this worth my time? What is it that you're looking for when you're looking from your computer screen above, so to speak?
Well, the number one thing that I'm just going to start with the con. What I don't like about this piece is that there are roads virtually all around all the units so that people can glass, people can easily access, and there's parking spots pretty much everywhere. So everything's very easily accessible within a quarter mile, it looks like, pretty much. So that's the only thing I don't like. The biggest thing is that it's so accessible, and it looks like for the size of the actual units, it might be a crowded area to hunt. It might be tough to kill a big deer. What I do like about it is that there's a river or creek that runs basically from northeast to southwest that can allow for some difficult access, which is exactly where my head goes right to, is where can I get where nobody else has thought to go or is willing to put the time in to get to.
What is there anything else about a water feature that piques your interest other than the access?
Well, generally, creeks and rivers are an absolute hub for whitetail activity just because a wise man once told me years ago, and I really do believe it, that a whitetail is really a river bottom type animal. They like to be near water for obviously for drinking, but also for security. I think it just allows them, they can set up and bed near those waterways with at least a view to them. And it basically allows them an instant access to an escape route right across the river or creek. But it also makes them feel very secure because they are not typically used to having predation come from the water itself. And I think we've all heard stories about guys hunting out of canoes and boats and things like that. For that reason is that literally they're just not used to being hunted from that water. The second reason, especially for a bow hunter, just doing the run and gun type setups on these public land spots, the creek or river access, if you walk up and down those creek banks, you're going to see every creek crossing, every one of these deer runs that are coming across. And every single time you come in and out of that hunting area along those creeks, you're going to see the fresh sign in the mud, in the sand, exactly what animals have been crossing back and forth. So within, it's some of them are difficult. You might have to use waders, hip boots, and or knee-high boots. But waders are the ones I look for because knee-high boots, everybody's got them, and everybody's going to be willing to walk down a creek in knee-highs. But those are the spots that you can instantly get that fresh intel and know exactly what crossed that morning, that afternoon. So even coming and going out of your stands, man, over the years, I cannot tell you how much I've learned and how much it has impacted my hunting, just being able to read that fresh sign, make a move immediately, and get in on them right then, right there.
Logically, thinking this through as you're talking, I'm thinking, okay, yeah, it makes sense to me, because it's going to bottleneck down their traffic across a particular given area because of the water. They're not going to just, in a piece of timber, there could be 4 trails within 30 yards of each other, and it's not likely that they're going to do that by water. Is that a safe assumption?
Well, it's the very similar situation. I have a huge creek that runs behind my property here, and I've been picking it apart for years. And all of us hunters as humans, we want to focus everything down and say, well, everything's going to use that main trail, right? Well, if you're hunting a mature deer, they most likely won't. Now, there are circumstances that, let's say there's a 200-foot cliff or a 100-foot cliff on one of these sections.
Sure.
If it's a vertical cliff, obviously a deer's not going to jump with a parachute. But big bucks don't like being cornered. They do not like being forced to go through an area. So you got to kind of anticipate that. And in this case, on these creeks, when I go through it, and if I see the main Hogzilla trail where there's tons and tons of deer tracks, where it's quite obvious there's does, there's fawns, and there's bucks using it, I instantly want to go straight downwind of it and find the oddball spot where a big buck would most likely cross. But generally, it's always going to be on the downwind side of those major travel corridors. And also, bucks want to do things slightly different each time, so they'll use the terrain, the most nastiest terrain ever, to feel more secure traveling during daylight. And you just got to break it down like strategically and just say, all right, if I'm a big old deer and I've been hunted in this area for a long time by everybody and their brother, and including some real yahoos, where am I going to feel comfortable traveling during daylight, even during the rut? Generally, it's going to be in those spots that just have not been hunted, which are going to be the oddball spots, or it's going to be the really steep terrain that puts the wind in their favor, meaning like where it's really tough to get the wind on them, where the winds swirl real bad, where it's really, really deep canyons, ravines. But those are the spots you can catch them, so that's where I want to hunt.
Okay. Interesting. I'm enamored by this whole public hunting thing only because it's new to me. I think I've said it before when we've been on the podcast that I've hunted the same property for the last 13 or 18 years, whatever it is. I'm not good at math. But there's, obviously there's none of this. My version of putting up a new set was going 10 yards from the set that I had. So this is all new, and it's very interesting. I think a lot of the same principles apply, but you just have to broaden the scope of your thinking a little bit, not just narrow it down to a few areas like I have in the past.
Well, the hard part about hunting public land is you just don't know who was there hunting before you and has ruined a spot. So even if you go in advance early in the season, preseason, whatever, in the summertime and scout, you find all these hardcore cool areas, and then you go home. If this is in Illinois, you're living in Wisconsin, whatever, or you're out of state, you're an hour away, 2 hours away, you don't know who has been in there and screwed it up between the time that you have done your scouting. So that's where, to me, like, you can do some pre-scouting and get some ideas, but you really got to go in and hunt and move until you're on them, or on one and find his little nook. But it's generally going to be in a smaller core. The more pressure, the smaller their core area gets, which makes it challenging. But once you find that core area and you don't screw it up, you can kill them your first hunt. But just finding those areas and not getting busted, you just got to be a better hunter. You got to be willing to work harder in order to do it on public land. Some guys enjoy that challenge, and I'll just say right now, many years ago I swore off public land because I grew up hunting it. I dealt with people, and my goal was to hunt mature deer as close to as natural environment as possible, which brought me down to Iowa. So for me personally, I'd rather go knock on doors and talk to farmers and get permission than hunt on public land and not be able to control the situation, because consistently killing big mature deer is all about controlling the environment. But the beauty of it is everybody likes something different. We got other guys who hunt almost exclusively public land. Some of our other guests like Lucas Psycho and Curtis Zabel. These guys enjoy that challenge, and that's what is killer about having public land out there, is that you can dabble your feet in it or go full bore. It's up to the individual hunter.
And the one thing that I'm finding out is, whether you know it or not, depending upon geographically where you live, the opportunities really are endless as long as you're willing to do the work. And as we've talked about many times, you got to do the work. And period. So, all right. Well, let's dive into the top left corner of the map, section 1. Is there what about section 1 do you like? What about it do you dislike?
It's really hard until you get in on these pieces. Like, you got to do. On any of these pieces, I would definitely do a summer scout where you just go in and you just look for terrain. I want to find the thickest cover in any one of these sections. I want to find the thickest cover, and I want to find the thickest cover adjacent to wherever the major food sources are. So I'm not sure if on this particular piece of public land, if they have food plots. A lot of them in Illinois do. They have dove hunting areas. They've got usually sunflowers. Some of them have standing corn, standing beans, things like that. So those are going to be important pieces of information to know where the food sources are going to be, because especially if you get toward a rut hunt, those bucks are going to be where the does are. So where are the does going to be? They're either going to be in the thick cover because of pressure, but generally it's going to be as close to a food source as you can get in the thick cover. So like in unit number 1, the way I would approach any public land hunting is I would probably try to divide my time in half. And I would hunt the spots that I would normally hunt half of the time, and the other half of the time, particularly on Saturdays and Sundays when it's going to be the highest likelihood of yahoos out hunting and sharing this land with a bunch of other hunters, I would pick stupid spots. What I mean by stupid spots are spots that guys would just overlook. And in areas of Illinois that I've hunted before, one time we were hunting, it was in the Jim Edgar Panther Creek area, which is a huge section in west central Illinois. And the spot we were hunting was just giant. So there was all kinds of different opportunities. So we had hunted, I forget whether it was 2 or 3 days, but it was myself and Kyle, and then Wally and Tater were hunting. And so we were kind of like sharing information, trying to get it on deer. And after one of our morning hunts, we just kind of took a scout, and we ended up going about like 100 yards behind the conservation center, which was literally the station that had, the DNR officer was always there. They had the information for the unit, all this stuff. And I'll never forget, because there was an adjacent sunflower field that had standing sunflowers, and it was where they had all this dove hunting. So you'd think where everybody's going to be parking and dove hunting in the conservation area. Well, go figure. Literally 100 yards behind the conservation center, we jumped a giant, like 160 class, super, super heavy, real bright white rack. Remind me a lot of the tree thrasher or the tree shredder. And that's where that buck had called home. And how secure did he believe in that area? Amazingly, we bumped him out, and it was late morning. And I looked at Kyle, and I think we even have it on video. It was on one of our videos. And I said, this is where we're going to come in this afternoon. So that afternoon, we went walking in there. We blew him back out. He had literally, we bumped him. He came right back into that same spot and bedded back down again within an hour or two. Well, we blew him out, and he never came back after that. 2 times, you're done. But it just goes to show those bucks are going to have a small little core area where they feel comfortable. And that deer had to have laid there his life, or at least part of his life, sitting there and listening to guys shooting doves all day long. Boom, boom, boom. It was like within 100 yards of one of these dove shooting fields. So, but that's the spot he'd never been bothered in by other hunters. So the weird spots, and when I say weird spots, you look at a typical draw with a creek. Generally, there's going to be timber along that creek, and then there's going to be draws that come out, and then each bottom of each one of those draws is going to be another, a secondary creek from drainage from the main fields. Most guys are always going to go straight to that creek and want to set up so they can get the main travel along the creek itself, which always has a giant run, and then they're going to want to set up on one of the other adjacent trails coming off from the draw. It's the spot everybody goes to. That's the spot I don't want to hunt, because a mature deer is not going to go through that pinch point funnel, everything we've been taught. I go to either a midway up the draw or all the way to the point, because you got to imagine these bucks want to position themselves where they can see trouble coming, so visually, and then a wind advantage. But I want to set up on the spot no other bow hunter has ever thought to set up. Sometimes you just got to think crazy. And like I said, man, just like that conservation area, it was one of the lessons I learned hunting public land. It was like, okay, there is no such thing as a stupid spot. So I'd split my time in half on any one of these units, and I would hunt crazy and I would hunt typical. And hopefully in between those hunts, you'll figure out where a core area one of these bucks are you want to kill. And whether you get them that weekend or not, it will get you set up for the next weekend if you're a typical weekend warrior like most of us are.
Moving on to section 2, in my opinion, that looks a little bit more promising than section 1, but we're not here. We're not here for my opinion.
No, I agree.
I don't know that we'll ever.
What I like about it is that waterway, man. Just deer are usually by that water. What I would do on 2 is I would try to find, especially like if I'm going in blind, and it's late. Or an early, I typically would try to do some early season hunts, and then use that intel to base, when I'm going to take my vacation. Because back then, I was doing the same thing everybody else is, which is hunting the weekends, and you get a week off during the rut. And so your weekend hunts, what I would do is I would find the acorn ridges along that creek and figure out a way to access them by doing a hook, meaning not just going right into your stand from in a way that is easiest to travel, but like coming in on if you look at parking spot number 4 and coming in the furthest direction of travel, getting along that creek, and then using the creek to come in and button hook up the ridge to try to catch the backside of that bluff along the creek, because generally there's going to be some ridges up there. That's where you're going to find your white oak acorn ridges, and you can do that in the preseason by scouting and figure out, okay, early season, they're probably going to be hitting acorns, and I want to be on those ridges in the timber way the heck back where it's almost impossible to get into. That's going to be my best likelihood of killing a buck early season on one of these public pieces, because they're not going to be traveling far at all. But what they will do is they'll bed on one of those bluffs or right along that creek, even in just tall grass, where they feel nice and comfy, and they'll walk within 50 to 60 yards in their little core area, and they'll go feed on acorns. They almost can't resist. So that's immediately what I think of as hunting in October, is I want to find white oak acorns and then hunt those ridges. And I generally won't even hunt field edges. And that's whether I'm hunting public land, my own property. I've learned over the years, if you want to kill a big mature deer, they're not going to be wandering around in open fields. They're not going to be walking along field edges, because if they did that, they would have died when they were a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old. That's just the way it is.
Which one do you want to do next?
Number 3 is the smallest one, which I'm always attracted to the one nobody wants to hunt. So sometimes, as humans, we all bigger is better. So, and believe me, we used to do the same thing. Oh my gosh, there's 500 acres right there. Let's go hunt that because that's the biggest piece. So if there's another little piece that's 80 acres or 70 acres or 60 acres, and maybe has roads right all around it, sometimes those are the spots that might get overlooked. So generally, bigger's not always better. So number 3, what I like about it is it's smaller. It might be a hidden little gem among these other pieces, because that's just the way guys are, man. We are all the same way. We want to hunt the biggest piece. But number 3, along that roadway, the north road, there's a parking. I would park at that north spot and then plan on walking along the road and then dipping in far down as far as I can get to the west there, and seeing if there was something along there, just literally just getting away from that parking area. And sometimes guys just don't want to walk on roadways. If you're hunting with a buddy, one of the best tactics or tricks I can teach is being able to drop off a guy, and you can take turns. So one guy gets to hunt the cool spot, one hunt, and then the other guy has to park in the parking area and hunt a different area. So if you got 2 guys, you can cover more area, but you can also drop off hunters along those roads, so long as it's legal, and so long as you're able to access the public land. But the other thing for number 3 and 4 together, there's a combo potential. There's where the main road crosses the creek there. There's going to be a bridge, and there's no parking areas near that bridge. So I instantly would go right to there and say, all right, if I'm hunting with a buddy, I'd think of a way to get dropped off at that bridge, and then you can access either to the south on unit number 2, you can access to the east on unit number 4, or to the northeast on unit number 3 by walking that creek in those various directions. You got to put yourself in a position of doing what most guys aren't going to do. And so I instantly go to just weird access points and spots that just are nowhere near a parking area. That's where my brain always goes. That may or may not be true in this case, but it would certainly be the highlight of my trip would be to try to plan some of those long walks in. And if you got to walk along roads, you walk along roads. I've done it. I've walked 2-3 miles with 60, 70 pounds on my back, and I would rather be sweating, soaking wet, and hunting the right spot than sitting scent free or trying to be scent free with a 100-yard walk off a parking area, because you're just not going to kill a big mature deer right there.
Good point. And one that I'm sure will be brought up again and again. In section 3, so the water that's on the backside, are you any more attracted to that than you are in section 1 or 2?
It just depends, and mostly it's going to depend on where your food sources are. So What I like about 3 is straight east of that is private and straight west of it's private. Generally, on the private farms in Illinois, you're going to have ag. So whether it's corn or beans, now whether these are probably just farmed areas, so it's probably going to be harvested. But it's all about food. You got to be close to that food. The thing about unit number 2 as well, on the opposite side of the creek to the east there, that's all private. So you can imagine those are all ag fields. There's a nice lower bottom field down there. That's probably a grass field. If I had to guess, it might be farmed, but I don't know. Till you get in there, you don't know. But on public land, you're best off trying to get to an edge where you're close to private, because that's the highest likelihood of there's probably less pressure, and generally there's more food in those areas. So you can squeeze up close to those edges. Obviously, you don't want to be hunting close enough where you're shooting over the property line or anything like that. But you got to use every advantage you possibly can. And so for me, I'm always thinking about cover and food and just spots that nobody else has thought to hunt. Another point, and Dan Edfoltz mentioned this on several of his different things. He's a public land expert. I am not. But a lot of these big bucks will actually bed close to these parking areas because they can actually monitor the hunters coming and going, and no one's going to hunt within 100 yards of the parking area because, everybody's following my theory. Well, I got to get away from those. So on my 50-50 split of hunting on these spots, I would be hunting, like I said, going deep on some of my hunts, and then the other spots, some of your dumb spots might be right next to a parking area, like within 100 yards. It just depends on the situation, but if you can find some good cover, and the other part too is, and this is where it takes a little bit of ingenuity. Anybody who's bow hunting in these areas is going to be hunting out of a tree stand. A lot of them are going to be using climbers. Okay, so they're going to be looking for big trees, tall trees, nice trees.
Okay.
The spots where these bucks are going to be living, there's not going to be a tree available. They're going to be in brushy, nasty stuff because that's where nobody hunts.
Sure.
So that's where you've got to be willing to hunt like no one else. And if that means literally one lone wolf stick and a hang-on in a 3-inch sapling, 5 feet off the ground or 10 feet off the ground, sometimes that's what you have to do. And even here in Iowa, dude, I've got all this land to hunt around here. Where I end up killing these bucks is in the spots where I'm like, how in the heck am I gonna? How can I even hunt this? And you got to find a way, and you got to hunt crazy. You got to try things you would never try ever before. I think camo has a lot to do with it. My way, I use Predator Fall Gray, which is the best pattern for breaking up my outline. A lot of the trees and spots I hunt, I can't imagine trying to hunt out of a normal pattern because it just looks like a blob, whether you're using, if I dare say, Sitka, Realtree, Mossy Oak, any of these other patterns. You back off, you put it up in a tree, and it looks like a caterpillar on the side of a weed. You can't get away with that. So how do you defeat that? Hunt lower, generally, which goes against all the rules you've ever heard. Everybody says, well, you got to hunt higher. If you look at the brush line in any timber, it's generally 10 feet off the ground. So why hunt 20 feet when you're 10 feet above that brush line? Hunt right in the brush line. So, 10 to 12 feet sometimes is the spot to be. And I prefer Predator Fall Gray because it breaks up your outline the best. And deer just, how many guys you see wearing Predator these days, right? Well, I don't want to look like another hunter. I want to look like no one else. I want to hunt like no one else. And that's how you kill big deer.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There's no substitution for being, unique and doing something a little bit different than what the average guy does. And I think that's what sets any of you that are successful in the outdoor industry. I think that's what sets you apart. I mean, if it were easy, everyone would be doing it. And I've said that before. So you
crappy trees, almost impossible areas to set up where you're just like and I'll tell you, you get in those areas, that's where the buck sign's going to be, where you're going to be standing going, well, how in the heck am I going to hunt this? Well, if there's not a tree, then hunt on the ground. I mean, you got to get crazy now. The other huge advantage we have now that we didn't have back when I was hunting this public lands, we have Ozonics. So you can get away with so much more with the wind because you don't have to consider getting busted by other deer, by does, whatever. you can get away with murder from your wind standpoint. So that opens up a lot of different areas that you'd normally not be able to hunt. But dude, going back to all those days, like I just remember, and I now all these years of experience and just putting two and two together and just seeing consistency after consistency year after year after year for 26 years now or something that I've been hunting. The brushiest, nastiest stuff that have no trees or very few big trees, like boom, that's the spot. You got to find out how to hunt. So how do you do it? My number one suggestion is get yourself a lone wolf hang-on and 4 sticks, and that is the most adaptable setup for any terrain, any conditions, anywhere. If you are walking in the field with a climber, you restrict where you can hunt, period. So I don't want that restriction. I want to be able to hunt anything. And lone wolf, you're able to hunt on any crazy angled tree, whatever. And you got to remember, most of the time we were doing this with camera guys, so that completely eliminated huge spots that we couldn't even think about hunting. So now that I'm self-filming, I can get back into that unique, hunting weird spots. But man, that's half of it. It's just picking trees that most guys would just say that's going to be too much work, or there's no way you can get away with hunting that spot. That's where I want to hunt. And of course, I always bring my wicked saw so I can cut, my lanes. But hunting public land, you've got to have a very, very, very minimalist approach. If you're walking into these areas, you can't just throw your gear down and start trimming shooting lanes. I mean, I'm literally picking my tree out 50 yards in advance, sneaking to that tree, and then as I'm approaching the tree, figuring out, okay, am I going to need to trim a lane right here? If I do, I'm going to trim it on the way to the tree, literally snipping my branches. And we have a killer little pruner now for wicked that we use, but I use a pruner and or my handsaw 90% of the time when I'm running and gunning. I'll always bring my pole saw, but you've got to have a minimalist approach. If you get in there and you start knocking trees down and making a bunch of noise, metal noise specifically, you will not, I say again, you will not get a crack at a big buck in that spot that night. Remember, you're hunting public land. Those animals are in tiny little pockets. So as you approach those pockets, whether you believe they're there or not, you have to think like they are there and like you are a thief trying to sneak in their bedroom, because that's what you're doing. And you have to set up silently, and you just have to take extra time to be quiet. But if you do those things and you hunt unlike anybody else, that's going to increase your odds by tenfold right off the bat. But it's going to be in spots that most guys will just say, there's no way you can hunt that. And that's the spot you have to figure out how to hunt.
You brought up, I don't remember exactly what you said, but it just reminded me of a recent conversation that I was having with the local sheriff's department. We were talking about Spartan cameras, and it really doesn't have a whole lot to do with Spartan cameras other than that was the reason for our meeting. And we were talking about the lengths that they go through to cover up their tracks when they're in on a marijuana grow or whatever the case may be. In this case, it was a marijuana grow, and I'm listening to you talk. And one of the things that obviously they do when they're going into an area is how much has it been disturbed? How much traffic is there going to be through there? And we talk about how much pressure is on public ground. I would assume that you would employ those same kind of tactics in terms of looking at, how much, of the foliage is bent over, broken off, trees trimmed, etc. Are those the kind of things that you're looking for when you're talking about human pressure in an area?
Absolutely. Then, like you mentioned, just about with the sheriff's department, another correlation that I've been able to make through one of my good friends, Eddie. Eddie is retired from 24 years in military special ops. And I mean, this dude is the real blown Rambo. He's been all over the world, and he has eliminated a lot of threats. I'll put it that way. And it's amazing how similar these setups, when they're hunting human beings, they're employing the same theories and thoughts that how do you do something that no one has been able to do with that particular target before, especially these high value targets. When you're hunting a guy like Osama bin Laden and some of these top Al-Qaeda guys, they have survived to become the top guys for a reason. It's because they're freaking smart and they surround themselves with the right people, and they know where they are safe and where they aren't safe. Now, the higher value target, I'm going to correlate that directly to a mature buck. The bigger, the older, the mature buck, they're going to have been through the ringer through season after season in these areas. They're going to be in the spots that are so difficult to hunt. That's the only way they can survive, and that's the way you have to rationalize it. Is, many years ago, I remember it to this day. Is right when I started doing a lot of run and gun hunting. Is I was like, I'd rather put the work in and be really aggressive to see deer and have opportunities than to have a relaxing hunt where I didn't have to work, because there's nothing worse than sitting in a stand and not seeing anything. And even worse than that, sitting there and having guys walk past you and just ruining your hunts. So change the way you hunt. If you're not killing mature deer, you have to literally just draw a line and say, okay, I'm no longer going to fall prey to my typical routine. You have to start thinking differently, and you have to start hunting differently. And the crazier these setups look and the crazier the spots, that ups your odds. Don't think about how you've hunted in the past. Don't think about where everybody else would hunt. Hunt independently, create your own style of hunting, and you will start to see and kill huge deer. But you've got to put yourself in those positions to do it. And if you're not, you might as well just stay home. What I mean by that is you've got to go into these spots thinking like you're a terrorist killer, and going in those spots where's a big mature deer going to survive? Is he going to be doing the same thing all these other deer are doing? No. Evolution will dictate it. It's forced evolution is what I like to call it. You've got to start hunting differently. So I would just start picking areas that have crappy trees. I mean, that's an easy thing to target, is just to look at brushy areas, especially if you can find those brushy areas with tall grass where you look at it and you go, how could you walk in there without blowing the whole neighborhood? Those are the spots they're going to live. So you got to figure it out. And most of the time you just got to be patient and go slow and not be afraid of blowing it, because I'd rather blow it by putting myself close to a big animal than not being close enough to kill him. I mean, it's like you either got to do it or you don't. So to me, that's where you got to be more aggressive on public land than you ever would be, but you got to be smart in how you do it. And not just go frickin' tearing through the woods 50 miles an hour trying to get distances, huge distances. What you want to do is find those weird spots and then just sneak in like a thief.
Is it safe to say that the reason that you can be more aggressive or need to be more aggressive isn't just for what you mentioned, but because, there's really endless opportunity, at least in my part of the world, and I don't know about your part of the world, but, for a lot of us, there's a significant amount of public ground. All of us, there's great public ground and great hunting. It's just a matter of if you want to go through the work is kind of what I'm hearing you say.
Yes, and the other thing is, too, here on my own farm, I put all this time in. I get the food plots and yada, yada, yada. That's where I live. That's what I look at every day. So I'm real sensitive, and I wait, and I'm very patient on when I go in and hunt some of these spots. In my opinion, on hunting public land, throw all that out the window. You're there. You try to make it happen every single hunt, whether it's October 1st through the 31st or November or whatever. Because it's public land, you don't have to be as sensitive to trying to keep the pressure off, because if you push them out of the neighbor might kill this big buck, whatever. Dude, on public land, throw all that out the window. That's where to me, the fun part about hunting public land is that you can get so aggressive. And if you blow it, guys. And a very, very good hunter that I learned a lot from many years ago told me that. He said, as soon as you lose that mentality of, well, I'm gonna push him out of there, I'm gonna blow it. If you don't try, you're never gonna kill that buck. They're not gonna just get up and wander out on that field edge or along that ridge that's wide open and a perfect spot to set your climber up and get a 50-yard shot in all directions. They aren't going there. You will not kill them there. So you either get aggressive and try, or you take up bass fishing or something. I don't know.
Throw horseshoes.
One other point I'd like to make. It seems more often than not, the spots...
That's not going to be your last point.
I know, I'll probably have... Well, one more point in the particulars of this.
Okay, go for
moment
it.
Of this paragraph. And,
I'll stop being a smart ass.
Yeah, I'm sorry, buddy. And now I lost my train of thought. But one more point, okay, is the spots where these big mature deer live, especially in areas that are really high pressured, a lot of times it's not where the most of the deer are. So if you want to go out and see 50 deer per hunt, go sit on the field edge, and you'll be able to see all these deer. And most of them are going to be hundreds of yards away, and you can look at them through your binoculars and say, isn't that pretty? I don't care about seeing 50 deer a hunt. I care about seeing one particular animal. Now, on this public land, you're probably not going to know what that particular animal is that you're going after. You're imagining it's going to be a mature deer, but don't let not seeing a lot of deer throw you off your goal. If your goal is to kill a big mature deer, a lot of times they're going to be in those spots that are just off the beaten trail, where you will possibly not see any other deer other than that big mature deer. And dude, here in Iowa, I've got a huge advantage because I've been hunting this area, so I've learned so much in the last 10 years, literally. And it still is the case, dude. You have all this food. I got these food plots everywhere. There's bedding everywhere. Not a ton of hunting pressure. There is pressure around. And it still is the case that a lot of times where I see and kill all of my big bucks, it's not spots where you see a lot of other deer. If I wanted to go sit out on the food plot or field edge, I could see 20, 30 deer a hunt. But again, I'm hunting a mature deer, so I don't care about all that. And if you're seeing tons and tons of small bucks running around, chasing and whatnot, it's almost a negative thing to me, because that tells me there's not a mature buck calling that area his core area. A lot of times with these big boys, they have this spot picked out and they've been using it for years, and there's a reason for it, because of security. And little bucks aren't going to go in that area because they've had their butts kicked for years in that spot. So generally speaking, where a big mature buck on any of these spots are going to be living, you may see young, immature animals. You'll see does, but if you're seeing a ton of 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds running around, it's probably not where that big buck's going to be, because 2 and 3-year-olds will get their butts kicked out of there. The big ones will tolerate those young 1.5s because they're not a threat. They don't feel that they're a threat. So, and sometimes they'll actually buddy up with them. I've seen that before too. A big 6, 7, 8-year-old deer will hang out with a spike horn or a little fork horn. It's just, again, you got to think, unlike any other hunter out there to kill these big ones, is if you want to kill a 3-year-old, then hunt the typical pinch points, field edges, whatever. If you want to kill the big 5, 6, 7-year-old deer, you got to change the way you hunt, period. That's it.
Okay, let's. I've got a couple things that I want to recap with, and I know that you got to get yourself on the road to Michigan before too terrible long. But Section 4, we hadn't covered in any detail yet. Is there anything there that, just real quickly, just give me, if you see anything there that just pops off the map, and then I'll just sort of recap a couple of things that I wanted to ask you.
Section 4, again, where that bridge crosses the river, I think that's key. Now, if you have to park and walk all the way around on that road, I don't know if that's possible or not, but how bad do you want it? If you got a buddy that's hunting with you, boy, that's the way to do it is, and this is how I would do it if I was a 2-man team. I'd have one guy park, or I'd have one guy drop me off at the bridge where I can walk the creek down. And depending on whether that's public land, you have to find out the legalities of this stuff. Don't take my word for it, because I would do a lot of double check to make sure you were legal and not cutting across private ground. But if I was a 2-man team, one hunt, I'd drop one buddy off, walk the creek, and get on the backside along the ridges there on number 4 on the north side, and using the creek to utilize or access that area. If I was hunting, and then the guy who drops off has to go back, and he's going to park at parking 1 there. I would hunt relatively close to that parking area up right by the road, and that would be my goofy hunt. So I would do, have one guy hunt the killer spot that's hard to get to, and then have one guy hunt the goofy spot where nobody else wants to hunt. And then rotate the next day, and maybe instead of going, to the west in a goofy spot, go to the east and find a goofy spot. But those are the spots that I'm telling you, man, you got to start hunting the spots nobody else wants to hunt. And some of them look stupid. Like, you'll be like sitting in a freaking tree and going, am I am I out of my mind? And that's where you can kill a big one. I'm telling you, you just got to hunt that stupid spots.
Okay, well, and again, I just picked this because it didn't jump off the map at me for any other reason than that's where it went to when I plugged in Joe Davies County, Illinois.
Sure. And I have one last tip. I have it on my little list here, something I wanted to also talk about. If you're just going into one of these spots for the first time and have no idea where to start by looking at the road crossings and ditches. There's always deer trails that cross the roads, and they always cut across ditches. You can get out of your vehicle, leave it parked right on the road, and just look at a trail, and you can see if there's fresh tracks in it. Find out where the most deer are crossing, and that's a good place to start. And then get in the timber, get downwind of where every other deer is traveling, and there's a good starting point. But always get on the downwind side of the thickest stuff you can find. That's like my go-to every single time. It's usually consistent. But again, you got to hunt stupid in those thick areas. You got to hunt low off the ground. Hunt spots nobody else wants to hunt. That's where you're going to find them on public land. I guarantee it.
Okay, let's jump on to my last couple of questions here, and then I'll let you get going and on the road to Michigan. You mentioned some of the benefits of hunting public ground. As we've talked here, my mind has wandered here and there, and I got to thinking. The property that I hunt, as I've said before on many different shows, is overrun with hunters. So it's not that much unlike the pressure that I'm going to see at a public hunting ground, and it may be the same for a lot of you that are listening. I think that would be fair to say. The only difference between the public hunting ground and the land that I hunt is the land that I hunt is more intensely managed for a number of deer versus a public hunting ground. It might be more of if it's brown, it's down type of mentality during the gun season or whatever. So I think it would be fair to say that there's probably, as I am mentally trying to, wrap my brain around how to do all this, it just occurred to me that maybe there's not that much more pressure there.
It's a different kind of pressure, I think, mostly. Generally speaking, when people own property, it's a private piece of ground, whether they have permission, they lease it, whatever. There's a little bit more of a commitment, and They're kind of like, you gotta take care of your neighbors. You can't piss people off. Public land, you get a little bit more of a unique individual. And it can be straight up from idiots who literally have no business being there and have maybe never even hunted in their whole life, all the way to guys who are really serious and they're going to, hunt and they're going to go as far as they have to and yada, yada, yada. But you get a little bit more of a Yahoo factor. Because it's public land, and once they leave that land, they have no further commitments. They don't have to pay taxes on it. They don't have to get along with the neighbors. If they piss off another guy who's hunting there, oh well, I'm going to go home and I never have to deal with them again. So you get that rogue factor, but you can use that to your favor. I mean, the number one thing is, one of the things I would say is if you pick a piece of public land, try to get away from a major city. As soon as you get close to major cities, you just have a larger number of people. So there's going to be a larger number of hunters. If you're within 30 minutes of that public area, close to a town, then they can get off work all early season and go hunting in the evenings. And that's a huge factor, man. If guys are hunting these spots all week long, by the time you get there on the weekend, maybe, dude, you're just stacking the odds against you. So it's all about trying to, stack the deck in your favor. So if you can hunt during the week, figure out a way to every hunter I know of, and we all were there hunting full-time job or working full-time jobs, you have to be creative in how you get your time off. So if you can hunt during the week, you're way better off. And that's half of it is you just got to know what areas are really busy, and you can use your early season hunts. Get out of your tree a little early in the morning and go out a little late and just do drive-bys, all these public parking areas, and find out where everybody's hunting. And that's generally not where I want to be. Some guys, they want to hunt where all those trucks are because, well, there must be a reason all those guys are there, right? Well, that's the last place I want to hunt. In my opinion, public land, it's all about finding the spot nobody is, or wants to be, and that generally is going to probably be one of your better spots to kill a mature deer.
Is it fair to say that with respect to public hunting that you can afford, we've spent a lot of time talking about a lack of intrusion with respect to public hunting grounds. You don't have to worry about that quite as much in the early season. I mean, if you've got some information that tells you that there's a deer that's killable because you've been getting trail camera pictures of them, and let's say I'm getting Spartan camera pictures of a buck that is a good buck, and he's using this oak flat to feed at 5 o'clock in the afternoons on the 15th of September. It's fair to say that you're not going to worry as much about blowing that animal out as you are on private ground. Is that accurate or fair to say?
Well, you can up your ante as far as risks go.
Sure.
And throw caution to the wind a little bit more when you don't have to worry about necessarily hunting that same spot next weekend or the next day. But that's the fun part about hunting public land, I think, is that you can throw caution to the wind in a lot of ways. But I'd say, if I was going in blind to any of these spots, I throw. You can do some pre-scouting, you can do some summertime scouting, whatever. You want to get yourself set up to where you have some familiarity with the area. Once you have familiarity with the area, with a couple ideas on access and stuff, go in with the mindset of, I will adapt to what I see, and don't set an anchor down or throw your anchor out before you even hunt the area or have been in there during the season. What you find along the way should dictate where you hunt and how you hunt that hunt. And that's what I love about run and gun hunting with just a lone wolf hang on its sticks, is that you can adapt to those situations, but you've got to slow down, take your time, be patient, get off the mindset where I got to be up my tree, I got to pick a tree, I got to be up in the tree. When are you going to kill a big buck? It's going to be right before dark or right after light. That's it. So you got a 15-minute at the end of the season or at the end of the hunt, and you got 15 minutes before. If it takes me an hour and a half to find the spot and get set up, and I only have an hour to hunt, great, whatever, it doesn't matter. They're not going to be moving around during daylight, trust me. They don't move around during daylight here in Iowa, and there's complete difference compared to public land. So just get that out of your mindset. Time in the woods doesn't kill big deer. Being in the right spot for that moment does. As soon as you get that in your brain, the rest of it, and growing up, I thought my problem was I didn't spend enough time hunting. So I'd sit there and I'd grind, and I'd freaking be sitting there at 10 o'clock in the morning going, I haven't seen anything. And I'd be like, well, I need to be out here. If I'm not out here, I'm not going to kill anything. Get that out of your brain, man. You got to find the right spot. It only takes 1 minute.
The other thing that I wanted to just add, you mentioned legalities and things of that nature. I just want to make sure that everyone's aware, just having some experience in the law enforcement world, don't be afraid to take the time to call those folks and ask them whether it's a parking issue, whether it's what's legal to do on a river, whether it's legal to use a creek access right off the road to, put your boat in where both sides is private property and you're trying to float into a spot that's public. Don't be afraid to call those people. They're not going to write you a ticket for calling them. Better to ask now than be the recipient of a fastball to the head in the form of a $500 ticket for doing something stupid. You'd be much farther ahead just calling ahead, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Jason, that is such a good point. And the reason we were even near that conservation area is we actually went and talked with them. I'm going to give you two pieces of advice, and they're both slam dunkers. Number one, if you're hunting out of state, especially for the first year, each one of these states has different tag systems. A lot of them now, or a lot of these different states have 2 tags you need to buy. And unless and there's been so many guys in the outdoor industry who have gotten tickets because they didn't get the right tags, or they didn't get, well, you mean I have to have a hunting license and a deer tag? Make sure you know exactly what you need, no matter what. The other thing is, if there is a conservation area office on any of these sites, go talk to the DNR officers. 9 times out of 10, they will be the nicest, most courteous people in the world because they're there for you. Go talk to them, find out what they've been seeing because they're patrolling in those areas. And a lot of times they'll tell you, hey, oh yeah, I saw a nice buck over there. Or hey, where does everybody hunt? And then again, it will give you any piece of intel. And, intel, it's all about intel, period. Whether you get it from a farmer, another hunter, or a DNR officer, sometimes the best thing you can do is just go be willing to talk to that DNR officer because every other hunter is afraid to talk to a DNR officer. They don't want to deal with that. They don't want to have any issues. So a lot of it is, dude, if you go talk to those guys, everyone we ever met, especially at Jim Panther, dude, these guys were the nicest guys you ever want to talk to. A lot of them are younger guys generally that work in the offices, but it varies. But dude, I've never met unless it was a situation where they, thought you were doing something wrong. Generally, if you go talk to any of those people at those offices, they're extremely friendly. They're more than courteous to help you. And again, they can point out the legalities, especially like where, hey, is it okay if we get dropped off here and we walk down this ridge to this creek and then use the creek? These are questions you'd much rather ask in advance than find out later the hard way, just by mistake. And most guys who get busted, aren't deliberately trying to get busted, but are just, through confusion or just hadn't hunted the area or, well, I hunted this area and you could do this. Well, on this one, you can't. So, dude, talk to the DNR officers if they're there. If there's a site there, that'd be the first thing I'd do is I'd go talk to them. Even in the summertime, get any intel you can. And then every time you go hunt there, stop in and say hello and find out, what's been going on. Have any big bucks been killed around here? That type of a thing. And if some giant bucks have been killed in a particular area, don't be afraid to hunt that area again because there may be another big one that moves in.
Good advice. Yeah, they're never afraid to share information, and they'd love nothing more than to see you be successful. So I've seen it again and again and again. Doing a ride along with a conservation warden of a friend that does that job for a living, and they're more than happy to give information when they know it. So
it's good job security, and that's what they're getting paid for. And
exactly.
And so, yeah, that's the number one thing is don't be afraid to ask a DNR officer. And with that being said, thank you to all of the department of all of our officers out there. You guys have a tough job, and I wouldn't want to do it, but we appreciate all the work you do and trying to catch all those poachers that are out there trying to break laws intentionally and do things wrong. So we thank all of the people out there, and also just after Memorial Day weekend, appreciate all the service from all of our police officers and military friends all around the world. We can't do what we do without you. So we appreciate it, and I thank you very much.
All right, man. Well, that's all the time that we've got for today. I'll catch up with you later. Sound good?
Sounds good, Jason. Thank you so much.
Well, there you have it, installment number 1 of our 4-part series on public land hunting. I hope you found value in what Todd had to say, and I know you're going to find value in the other 2 guests and what they have to say. I know I learned a lot just through this process alone, and I'm sure it's not going to be any different for any of you. That said, tune into the next 3 episodes. The next one will feature Curtis Zabel, and the one after that will feature none other than Mr. Lucas Psycho. So look for those in the next couple of weeks, and also be listening to the entire podcast to find out when you can enter for your chance to win that free gear from Ozonics. That is about all I've got for this week. In the words of Curtis Zabel, stay hungry, stay humble. Jason out.